more than 170 feet. That is how far Lake Powell has fallen from its full pool elevation during one of the most significant water crises in modern American history. Yet amid shrinking shorelines, exposed canyon walls, and growing uncertainty across the Colorado River basin, one enormous floating complex remains in operation. Boats still arrive, fuel continues to flow, tourists continue to gather, and at the center of it all sits what is widely believed to be the largest floating restaurant on Earth. Its survival raises a series of important questions. How does a massive floating business remain functional when the lake beneath it keeps changing? What happens to marinas, houseboats, fuel docks, and tourism infrastructure when a reservoir loses more than 51 meters or 170 feet of water elevation? And what does the future hold for an operation that depends entirely on a lake facing long-term challenges from drought, population growth, and increasing water demand throughout the American West? These questions converge at Antelope Point Marina, a sprawling, floating facility located near Page, Arizona, on the southern reaches of Lake Powell. For more than 2 decades, the marina has been adapting to conditions that few engineers, business owners, or visitors could have fully anticipated when construction first began. While millions of visitors continue to travel through the region every year, the environment supporting that tourism economy has been undergoing a profound transformation. Lake Powell itself is one of the largest reservoirs in the United States. Created by the construction of Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River, the reservoir stretches across vast sections of northern Arizona and southern Utah. At full capacity, Lake Powell can store approximately 24 million acre-feet of water, equivalent to nearly 29 billion cubic meters. The reservoir serves multiple purposes, including water storage, hydroelectric power generation, recreation, and management of river flows throughout the Colorado River system. For decades, Lake Powell became synonymous with boating recreation. Its maze of sandstone canyons, dramatic cliffs, and hundreds of kilometers of navigable waterways transformed it into one of the most popular destinations in the American Southwest. Houseboats became especially popular, allowing visitors to explore remote coves and canyons while carrying the comforts of a floating vacation home. As demand for recreational facilities grew, marina operators expanded their infrastructure. Floating docks, fuel stations, rental fleets, maintenance facilities, and hospitality services developed around the reservoir. Among these projects, Antelope Point Marina emerged as one of the most ambitious. Unlike traditional waterfront facilities built along fixed shorelines, the marina was designed around a constantly changing reservoir. Water levels naturally fluctuate from year to year, depending on snowpack, runoff, water releases, and seasonal demand. Engineers understood that floating infrastructure would need flexibility, but the scale of future declines proved far greater than many expected. The marina eventually evolved into one of the largest recreational boating centers anywhere in the western United States. Hundreds of slips accommodate privately owned vessels. Rental operations provide access to powerboats, wake boats, fishing boats, and luxury houseboats. Fuel docks support continuous marine traffic throughout the recreation season. Service facilities maintain vessels worth hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars. Perhaps the most visible symbol of the marina's scale is its floating restaurant complex. Unlike small dockside cafes commonly found at marinas, this structure resembles a floating destination in its own right. Built atop large floating platforms and connected to extensive dock systems, the restaurant serves visitors arriving both by water and by land. Its size alone makes it remarkable. Floating restaurants exist throughout the world, particularly in coastal cities and riverfront tourist destinations. Yet few approach the scale of the operation anchored at Antelope Point. The facility occupies a substantial floating footprint, creating a dining venue capable of serving large numbers of visitors during peak tourism periods. The restaurant's existence, however, depends on much more than food service. Every aspect of the operation is linked directly to the health of the marina and the condition of Lake Powell itself. During years when reservoir levels remain relatively stable, floating infrastructure can be repositioned gradually. Access ramps are adjusted, dock sections are relocated, utility connections are modified as needed. The process is challenging but manageable. The situation becomes far more complicated when water levels decline rapidly over extended periods. Beginning in the early years of the 21st century, much of the Colorado River Basin entered an extended drought period. Scientists and water managers have debated terminology, with some referring to portions of the period as a megadrought due to its duration and severity. Regardless of terminology, the impacts became increasingly visible throughout the basin. Snowpack in portions of the Rocky Mountains varied significantly from year to year. River flows declined compared with historical averages. Reservoir storage across the system came under growing pressure. Lake Powell, one of the basin's largest storage facilities, became a highly visible indicator of those changes. The numbers attracted national attention. Shorelines retreated. Formerly submerged rock formations emerged above the waterline. Boat ramps required modification. In some locations, marina facilities faced relocation efforts measured not in yards or meters, but in miles and kilometers. For Antelope Point Marina, adaptation became an ongoing operational requirement rather than an occasional engineering task. Floating marinas possess one major advantage over fixed structures. They can move. That flexibility has proven essential. As water levels declined, marina operators repeatedly adjusted dock positions to maintain navigable access. Extensive gangways connecting land-based facilities to floating docks required modification. Infrastructure that once occupied one section of shoreline often needed relocation as the lake receded. Each adjustment involved significant planning. Floating sections weighing thousands of pounds or hundreds of kilograms cannot simply be pushed into new positions without coordination. Utility systems supplying electricity, water, communications, and fuel require continuous integration with the changing layout. The logistical complexity grows even further when large vessels enter the equation. Lake Powell is famous for its houseboat culture. Some vessels resemble compact floating homes, complete with bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, upper decks, and recreational equipment. Premium models can represent investments reaching well into six figures, and in some cases, beyond. Managing fleets of large rental houseboats requires deep water access, adequate maneuvering space, fueling capability, maintenance infrastructure, and reliable docking facilities. As reservoir levels change, each of those requirements becomes more difficult to satisfy. Yet despite these challenges, rental operations continue attracting visitors. The reason is straightforward. Lake Powell remains one of the most visually distinctive boating destinations in North America. Towering sandstone formations rise hundreds of feet above the water. Narrow canyon passages extend into remote landscapes inaccessible by road. Sunlight reflects off red and orange rock surfaces that have been sculpted over millions of years by geological processes. Even as water levels decline, much of this scenery remains spectacular. Tourism, therefore, continues to play a central role in sustaining marina operations. Visitors arriving at Antelope Point often encounter a floating city rather than a traditional marina. Rows of boats stretch across the water. Service vessels move between docks. Fuel operations function throughout busy periods. Maintenance crews work behind the scenes to keep systems operational. Rental staff prepare vessels for departing customers while incoming visitors return from days spent exploring the reservoir. The floating restaurant serves as one of the primary gathering points within this environment. For many visitors, the restaurant provides more than a meal. It offers a vantage point overlooking one of the most dynamic recreational landscapes in the American West. Diners can observe boat traffic, changing lake conditions, and the immense scale of marina operations unfolding around them. Yet the very forces drawing attention to Lake Powell also represent the greatest long-term challenge facing the marina. The Colorado River system supports tens of millions of people across multiple states. Water stored within reservoirs such as Lake Powell and Lake Mead supplies cities, farms, industries, and ecosystems throughout the region. Demand continues to grow, while long-term water availability remains uncertain. Reservoir levels fluctuate for many reasons, including annual runoff patterns, water management decisions, evaporation, and consumption throughout the basin. When inflows decline and demands remain high, storage levels can fall significantly. Those realities create a unique operating environment for businesses dependent on the reservoir. Unlike many tourist destinations, where the surrounding geography remains relatively constant, Antelope Point Marina operates within a landscape that can physically transform from year to year. Shorelines migrate, navigation channels change, infrastructure requires continual adaptation. In many respects, the marina has become a case study in resilience through flexibility. Its continued operation demonstrates that floating infrastructure possesses advantages not available to conventional shoreline developments. While fixed facilities may become stranded far from the water's edge during extreme declines, floating systems retain the ability to move with changing conditions. That advantage, however, is not unlimited. Every relocation requires resources. Every adjustment carries costs. Every operational decision must account for the possibility that future lake conditions may differ substantially from present conditions. For the world's largest floating restaurant and the sprawling marina surrounding it, survival has become closely linked to adaptation itself. Adaptation on this scale extends far beyond moving docks and adjusting gangways. Every major component of the marina depends on a carefully coordinated system designed to function despite conditions that can change dramatically over time. Fuel deliveries, vessel maintenance, waste management, electrical distribution, water supply, and visitor access all require continuous attention. When a reservoir loses more than 51 meters or 170 feet from its full pool elevation, even routine operations can become engineering challenges. Fuel infrastructure provides one of the clearest examples. Lake Powell covers an enormous area when water levels are high, with hundreds of miles and kilometers of shoreline winding through side canyons and broad open water sections. Boaters often travel substantial distances during a single excursion. Houseboats, powerboats, service vessels, and recreational craft depend on reliable access to fuel. At Antelope Point Marina, fuel operations are integrated directly into the floating infrastructure. Maintaining that capability requires constant accommodation to changing water conditions. Fuel systems must remain accessible to vessels of varying sizes while continuing to meet operational and environmental requirements. Floating fuel docks must remain connected to shore-based support systems even as shoreline positions evolve. The challenge becomes even more significant when considering the size of many vessels operating on Lake Powell. Large houseboats have long been one of the defining features of recreation on the reservoir. Some are designed for extended vacations involving families or large groups. These floating accommodations often include multiple sleeping areas, kitchens, bathrooms, entertainment systems, and rooftop gathering spaces. Their dimensions can rival those of small residential structures. Managing such vessels requires extensive marina infrastructure. Dock space must accommodate their length and width. Navigation routes must remain accessible. Maintenance facilities must support everything from mechanical repairs to routine inspections. Rental operations must coordinate departures and returns while ensuring vessels remain ready for the next group of visitors. All of these requirements continue regardless of changing lake elevations. For visitors arriving at Lake Powell for the first time, the scale of the marina often comes as a surprise. Many people associate reservoirs with boat ramps, fishing areas, and small recreational facilities. Antelope Point operates on an entirely different level. The marina functions as a major tourism hub, serving thousands of visitors throughout the recreation season. Rental fleets, hospitality services, food operations, marine services, and recreational support systems operate simultaneously within a floating environment. The restaurant occupies a prominent role within this network, serving boaters, tourists, marina guests, and travelers exploring the surrounding region. Its position atop floating platforms allows it to rise and fall with lake levels, an advantage that fixed shoreline restaurants do not possess. Yet, access to the facility still depends on extensive infrastructure connecting water-based operations with land-based transportation networks. As lake elevations decline, those connections become longer and more complex. Gangways extending from shore to floating facilities must often be modified or replaced. Parking areas, access roads, and support facilities may find themselves farther from the water than originally intended. Distances that once required short walks can become significantly greater as shorelines retreat. The physical geography of Lake Powell amplifies these effects. Unlike many reservoirs formed in broad valleys, Lake Powell occupies a landscape carved by ancient river systems into sandstone plateaus. The resulting terrain features steep canyon walls, narrow inlets, dramatic cliffs, and irregular shorelines. Changes in water elevation can therefore produce substantial horizontal shoreline movement in addition to vertical declines. In practical terms, a drop of several dozen feet or meters can expose vast areas of previously submerged terrain. Marinas must continually evaluate navigation routes, docking locations, and operational layouts to accommodate those changes. The reservoir's transformation over the past 2 decades has been visible not only from the water, but also from the air. Satellite imagery has documented expanding shoreline areas, narrowing channels in some locations, and growing expanses of exposed rock and sediment. Visitors returning after several years often find landscapes noticeably different from those they remember. Despite these changes, Lake Powell remains one of the most heavily visited recreation destinations in the region. Part of that appeal comes from the sheer scale of the reservoir. Even at reduced elevations, Lake Powell still contains an immense network of waterways extending across hundreds of miles and kilometers. Recreational opportunities remain extensive, including boating, fishing, sightseeing, kayaking, water sports, photography, and exploration of remote canyon environments. This continuing demand has helped sustain marina operations through challenging periods. Tourism has always been a major economic driver throughout the Lake Powell region. Visitors support hotels, restaurants, retail businesses, tour operators, transportation services, and recreational facilities. Marinas represent a critical link within that economic chain because they provide access to the reservoir itself. When visitors rent a boat, purchase fuel, reserve a houseboat, dine at a floating restaurant, or utilize marina services, they contribute to a broader tourism economy that extends far beyond the docks. That interconnected system means changes at Lake Powell have implications reaching well beyond the water's edge. Water levels within the reservoir are influenced by conditions occurring hundreds of miles away. Snowfall in mountain watersheds, seasonal runoff patterns, water consumption throughout the Colorado River Basin, reservoir management decisions, and climatic trends all contribute to the amount of water ultimately stored behind Glen Canyon Dam. The Colorado River system itself ranks among the most important water networks in North America. Water originating in the Rocky Mountains supports agricultural production, municipal water supplies, industrial activity, and recreation across a vast region. Reservoirs, such as Lake Powell, function as strategic storage facilities designed to help balance supply and demand throughout the basin. During periods of abundant runoff, reservoirs can accumulate significant storage. During prolonged dry periods, stored water becomes increasingly important. The challenge facing water managers throughout the 21st century has been the persistence of conditions that frequently place pressure on available supplies. Several years have produced strong runoff and temporary improvements in reservoir levels. Other years have reinforced concerns regarding long-term water availability. As a result, businesses operating on Lake Powell have learned that recovery periods and decline periods can occur within relatively short intervals. This uncertainty complicates long-term planning. A marina operator considering infrastructure investments must evaluate not only present conditions, but also potential future lake elevations. Decisions involving docks, utilities, access routes, and facility expansion require assumptions about water levels years into the future. The floating restaurant faces similar realities. Its continued operation depends on maintaining accessibility, utility connections, and sufficient visitor demand. The restaurant may rise and fall with the reservoir, but it remains connected to a broader system that must continuously adapt to changing conditions. The ability to remain operational despite those conditions has become one of the defining characteristics of Antelope Point Marina. Over time, the facility has effectively evolved alongside the reservoir. Adjustments that might once have been considered extraordinary have become part of routine management. Relocations, infrastructure modifications, and operational adaptations now form an ongoing process rather than isolated events. This flexibility helps explain why visitors continue to find a bustling marina environment despite headlines focusing on drought and declining water levels. Images showing exposed canyon walls and receding shorelines can create the impression that recreation has disappeared from Lake Powell. The reality is more complex. While lower water levels undeniably affect navigation, infrastructure, and access in certain areas, large portions of the reservoir remain active recreational destinations. Marina operators have responded by adapting routes, relocating facilities, modifying services, and reconfiguring operations where necessary. The floating restaurant, surrounded by docks, boats, and marina activity, stands as one of the most visible examples of that adaptation. Its continued presence demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of floating infrastructure. Unlike fixed buildings, it can move with the water. Unlike conventional shoreline facilities, it remains directly integrated with boating operations regardless of moderate elevation changes. Yet it still relies on a reservoir whose future depends on forces extending far beyond the marina itself. Those forces include population growth throughout the American West. Cities across the Colorado River Basin have expanded significantly over recent decades. Agricultural demands remain substantial. Industrial uses continue. Environmental considerations increasingly influence water management decisions. Every sector depends in some way upon the availability of reliable water resources. Lake Powell sits at the center of many of these discussions because of its role within the broader river system. For Antelope Point Marina, the outcome of those larger regional trends carries direct consequences. Water levels influence navigation, accessibility, infrastructure costs, and visitor experiences. While the marina has demonstrated remarkable adaptability, its long-term future remains connected to the reservoir that supports it. That reality has transformed the marina into more than a recreational facility. It has become a visible indicator of how businesses across the American West are responding to environmental change, operational uncertainty, and shifting resource conditions. The world's largest floating restaurant continues serving meals. Houseboats continue departing for distant canyons. Rental fleets continue welcoming visitors. Fuel docks continue operating. Yet every season unfolds against the backdrop of a reservoir whose future remains one of the most closely watched water stories in the United States.